Good evening and welcome to the second series of events hosted by the Conservative Friends of the Armed Forces and CAPTA. I'm Katja Hall, I'm the Corporate Affairs Director here at CAPTA, and I'm delighted that we have partnered with the Conservative Friends of the Armed Forces and that together we're hosting this interesting and important discussion at what is, of course, the Conservative Party's first online conference. CAPTA is a proud partner to the Ministry of Defence and to the Armed Forces. We deliver recruitment to the British Army, a fire and rescue capability for the MOD. We provide e-learning and support services to the UK Defence Centre for Languages and Culture, and we provide technical support to the Astute-class submarine build programme. Today we're discussing technical expertise in the Armed Forces, how we attract it and how we build it. And I'm really thrilled that we're joined by 3 MPs elected for the first time in 2019. So first up we have Darren Henry, who was elected MP for Broxtowe, and he was previously a squadron leader for the RAF. We then have Richard Holden, MP for North West Durham. Richard is a former special advisor and he now serves on the Public Accounts Committee. You can see he's not currently able to join us because he's having some technical problems, but we hope that he will be able to join during our discussion. And then we're also very pleased to be joined by Tom Randall, who is the new MP for Gedling and won his seat from Vernon Coker with a majority of 679. And we are going to hear from each panellist for about 10 minutes, and then we will have some time, we hope, for questions at the end. So on that note, I'll hand over to you first of all, Darren.
Thank you, Katja, and good evening to everyone. You may have seen the Armed Forces recruitment adverts, and they make quite a number of claims in those adverts. The Royal Navy advert, and I'll start with them actually, because of course they're the senior service. So they say, can you fix a board, as in a skateboard? Then can you fix a bike? And if you can fix a bike, then you can fix a car. And if you can fix a car, you can learn to fix a Lynx Mark 8 helicopter. And in the army, they have an advert showing soldiers in an operational background, but making the point that these soldiers are qualified electricians, certified plumbers, fully trained chefs, licensed truck drivers, IT technicians, HR specialists, as well as what you'd expect an infantry soldier as well. And to make the point that there is more than one way to be the best. The Royal Air Force, they say, so you like figuring stuff out? Then can you solve this problem in an operational setting for communications? Can you get all this done by cooking for hundreds of service people at a time? Are you any good at listening, which is an intelligence getting, and leadership in a loading aircraft setting, or protecting in an RAF regiment setting role? And of course, flying. Everyone has that thing that they were born to do, find your force. So it's quite stirring stuff, but all of those adverts have something in common. The Armed Forces will train you to be a professional. And that is how I started. For me, I had no thought of I wanted to be a politician eventually. I was 18 years old, not really knowing what I wanted to do in life as a career, but I knew I was receptive to training. So I went to the Careers Information Office. I liked the Royal Air Force uniform. They looked professional, so I made inquiries. I asked about being a fireman, and they said my chest was too small. Bizarre, I'd say. Anyway, I did an aptitude test and they said, have you considered air traffic? So I became a tradesman in air traffic control. And as expected, they trained me well at the school near Shrewsbury. I worked out on the airfield closely with other trades, ironically with fire section as well. Also, I worked with engineers, drivers, administrators, and of course, aircrew. I was getting more mature now though, and I realised the great variety of roles that were on offer in the military. And I had options, even though I was already serving. the RAF was receptive to me taking a different path within the service and would allow me to grow and become what I wanted to be. So I went around and I interviewed different officers on the station that I was serving on as a corporal. I decided the supply branch, as it was then, but eventually became the logistics branch, was the one of most interest to me. I applied and became a commissioned officer. As an officer, I was posted into a new role in the logistics branch every 2 years. So there will be a pattern of steep learning curve to understand the new position, trying to do well in that role, and then start getting ready again for the next posting. So all the time, you're having to adapt quickly to a new expertise in your field, having to look ahead to what is happening next, understand the bigger picture, and effectively learning and practicing leadership. Now, this is happening at all levels in the military. So if you're an airman, senior NCO, or an officer, it is just the size of your responsibility that goes up as you go up in rank. One tour, I was responsible for the bulk fuel installations, ensuring the aircraft had the quality of aviation they needed for flying. On another tour, I had responsibility for families, housing, catering on the site, and welfare, which is another example of the work I did. Now, I've been deployed to various places in the Middle East, including Iraq, had responsibility for passenger and baggage operations in a deployed Middle East number of locations. That particular role was a bit like an airport manager, and we call this specialization air movements. Now, I've been responsible for projects. One was a £21 million air movements project. I've had to learn about consignment tracking using the latest radio frequency identification tools to track equipment on land, on ship, and up through the Pakistan country all the way into Afghanistan. Now, all of these roles are supported by training at various training establishments around the country. So, as an example, I did my 15-week air movements course at RAF Bryce Norton. But also seeking external qualifications to learn while you earn was encouraged. Personnel can use their professional training to count towards further qualifications using enhanced learning credits or standard learning credits, gaining registration with professional bodies. As an example, an engineer might register with the Engineering Council or IMEC-E. Now, I myself was a member of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport and the Institute of Leadership and Management. I did several Open University courses, and also in project management, I was a Prince 2 practitioner, as another example. I personally spent one tour as a teacher at RAF College Cranwell. I taught logistics to engineering and logistics officers, but we had a different term for teacher in the military. We call them instructors. So I instructed, and the students took instruction. In other words, do as I say. I took the opportunity whilst I was there to broaden my knowledge. So I did a postgraduate course in coaching. So I learned about life coaching, along with my day job that I was doing. And of course, with coaching, you learn about listening. And that stood me in good stead as my role now as a politician. In the last 2 years of leaving the service, you qualify for resettlement training managed by the Career Transition Partnership. So that's learning about CV writing and whatever field of employment you wish to do after you leave the military. I use some of my learning credits that I talked about earlier to contribute towards the first year of a degree. And I completed that distance learning degree in logistics management with the University of Lincoln. Now, that is my experience. It's also worth mentioning the RAF have 23 roles. From that come RAF apprenticeships, rated outstanding by Ofsted, by the way. They are available in a broad and diverse range of careers, including aviation operations, engineering, hospitality and catering, and IT. Qualifications you can earn in the RAF range from a level 2, the equivalent to 5 GCSEs, a level 3, equivalent to 2 A-levels, all the way through to level 7, which is equivalent to a master's degree. So I had a very rewarding career in the RAF, and I would recommend it to anyone. But as a politician now, I can draw on those service values that I picked up: loyalty, integrity, leadership, teamwork, getting stuff done. And so I'm going to sum up by saying I worked hard, I learned hard, and I played hard. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Darren. Fascinating to hear your story and your journey. Richard, we can see you. I hope we can hear you. So I'm going to try and come to you next. It seems like we've still got some technical issues with regard to Richard's connectivity. So while we try and sort those out, I'll come to you instead, Tom.
Well, thanks, Katja, and thank you for inviting me onto this panel this afternoon. And I wanted just to say a couple of things about transferable skills, both in terms of getting into the military and afterwards. And actually, I think it very much builds on, and in some cases repeats, some of the points that Darren made in his contribution. I think transferable skills are really important, and I think in this context they're really important for three reasons. One is that they're important for the personnel themselves. I know that there will be some people who leave school or leave university and join the armed forces and have a career with the armed forces until they retire. But many do not, and some are there for 5, 10 or 15, 20 years. And it's important that when they decide to leave service, that they have actually got some skills as they re-enter the labour market that they can take with them to get a post-service job. And as Darren was saying, I think the ability to gain skills while in the armed forces is an attractive offer to those who are looking to enter military service in order to sort of as part of a longer term career, and also makes them more attractive on the job market afterwards. I think there's also a value for the armed forces themselves in equipping people with transferable skills. It's a sort of form, really, I suppose, of like giving back or social responsibility, as the armed forces forms part of the sort of wider fabric of society, that they are helping. Obviously, their primary role is defence of the realm, but they're also helping to equip a group of people to, in terms of upskilling them. And thirdly, we talk a lot about these days about the military covenant and a sort of duty to armed forces personnel that doesn't necessarily end when they leave service. And I think equipping them with skills for life after their service does sort of, in some ways, fit into that. And I think that's very much a sort of popular trend at the moment, and rightly so. And I just had a look this afternoon at the number of companies that have signed the Armed Forces Covenant, and it's currently standing at 5,739, ranging from AB Walker and Son of Reading right through to Zymagorian Limited of Manchester. So a whole range of companies have signed up for this. Zymagorian, by the way, I had to look them up. They're apparently a hand sanitizer company, so they're probably doing very good business at the moment. Now, I haven't served in the military myself, but I have worked with those who have, both in my current job and my previous roles as well. And I think the appeal for hiring ex-military staff is quite obvious. They've got communication skills, good organisation skills, a strong work ethic, and leadership and management skills. And I understand there is up to 14,000 skilled and experienced individuals leaving the armed forces every year, which is creating a big talent pool that companies and other organisations can draw from each year in order to get talented staff. And as Darren was saying, there are organisations that can help with that transition from military life to civilian life, and the Career Transition Partnership, which is a collaboration between the Ministry of Defence and Right Management, which is a part of the Manpower Group, which I think a lot of people will be familiar with, provides resettlement services. And they've assisted, since the inception of that programme, they've helped 235,000 service leaders with the transition to service life, which can, I think, be as little as just helping with creating a CV or interview skills, which obviously, if you have been in service for a long time, in the same way if you've been in any particular job for some time, those are skills that can be a bit rusty and you'll need help on, particularly making a big transition like return to civilian life. And I know that there are a lot of big companies, the sort of bigger corporates, have got specialist programs for helping those who are making that transition. Amy, Raytheon, BAE Systems and Airbus, I think, just to name a few, who have got formal systems in place and major recruitment programs that they use. But I think the way I look at it in terms of transferable skills, and Darren sort of outlined it well to start with, about there's a lot of these soft skills that are available, but there are also some hard skills as well. Those who have worked in, well, you were talking about logistics, that's a very sort of good crossover into logistics businesses. Those who have done work in the engineering sector in the armed forces, a lot of skills there that have been carried over. People who have worked in the core signals will develop very high quality IT skills. So I think there's a whole range of soft and hard skills that make serving in the armed forces and that return service in the armed forces very attractive to employers, particularly in a high-tech economy which we've got growing at the moment. So this afternoon I just had a quick look at some specialist recruitment websites which were particularly targeting those who are leaving or who have just left the armed forces. And just in the Nottinghamshire and East Midlands region alone, I saw jobs that ranged from a QA lead at a crypto engineering company that required developed vetting clearance right through to white goods engineers. So there is this sort of range of demand there for those who have served in the armed forces. And I think those transferable skills are really important and can play a key role in industry and the wider economy. And I really hope that continues.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. And Richard, we're going to make one more attempt to come to you, if we can all hear you now. I think it's still proving tricky. We can see you, but I can't actually hear you. Okay, I think unfortunately let's leave it for now and start some of the questions. And just if I can kick off, and we'll have questions on the chat as well. And I guess I think one of the things, in fact, you were planning to talk about, Richard, was the current situation. We're obviously expecting, unfortunately, unemployment to go up because of the COVID crisis. And I'd be interested in both your views, perhaps come to you first, Darren, around how you believe the armed forces can make sure they stay relevant and attractive as an employer in the 21st century.
I think we've got...
We heard you for a minute, for a few seconds.
I thought we had Richard coming back on, but obviously not. Yeah, so I think the armed forces, their job is not to prepare you for doing other things. When I joined up, first of all, I really thought it was a job for life. I didn't realise that, sort of grow into doing other things, had a family, other priorities and so on. So what it does do is it already just teaches you a variety of different things, that constant changing. So, I'll move around every 2 years. I'll go into a different role. I'd have to learn that role. I'd have to try and do well in that role and then get ready and prepared for the next role. So I think it prepares you for change. And I think now post-COVID, those skills are really, really useful. If we want to go to ex-service people for some of these jobs, I think that's where you'll find real strength. in their ability to, understand what the role is fairly quickly, that work ethic, so they work extremely hard. And most importantly, they want to get things done. I think that's hugely important. I talk to my kids about the cartoon Shrek. And in the cartoon Shrek, he uses a line where he says, "I'm nobody's messenger boy, I'm a delivery boy." And I love using that because that's how I feel. I feel that I'm here to get a job done. And I've taken that into politics when I've been a councillor, making sure that we try and get some things done in the local community, which, really satisfies people. Some people are annoyed because some things can't get done, but far more are satisfied. So I think, the military, with their background in, loyalty and integrity, hard work, I think they're very good for future employment and use these people post-COVID.
Thank you very much. Richard, we're going to try you one more time, either with or without video. We still can't hear you, or I can't, certainly. No, sorry. Before we move to questions from the audience, any reflections from you on how the armed forces keep themselves relevant as an employer? And you talked about transferable skills and all the kind of broader benefits of a career in the armed forces. How do we make sure that that message is heard loud and clear, and that people kind of see the armed forces as a route to a fulfilling and rewarding long-term career?
Well, I think we opened this discussion with a description of the advertising that they've been doing. I think they are really sort of powerful standout adverts, which demonstrate the value of a career in the armed forces and the sort of things that you can achieve in them. And I think that in itself, should, I hope, be helping to that process. And I think in terms of, I completely agree with everything that Darren said. And we are probably going to be in a sort of more challenging position, as time goes on. And, I know I've been in a position where I've been looking for a job during a recession, for example, and it's not an easy process because the job market becomes a lot more competitive. And you're competing alongside people with more experience than you have for the same job because of the dynamics of the job market. I think one of the things that particularly would stand out to me is if you're looking at CVs, for example, a line on the CV that says you've done service in the military, I think is one of those things that jumps out at employers. It is one of those things that people do have preconceptions. I think good preconceptions about what military life is like and the sort of skills that people will bring to a role. So if you've got, if I'm recruiting for somebody and I'm looking at a dozen CVs that have come in, and I see one of them where someone has done, whether it's for a short period of time or for a longer period of time, has done service in the military, that's going to jump out at me as somebody who, as Darren very, eloquently explained, is someone who can get things done and knows what they're doing, and that as an employer is definitely the sort of things that I'm looking for in someone. So I think that reputation will be maintained, and I think I'd like to think that that's a reputation that should speak for itself, really, in time to come.
Darren, you talked about overall having a very positive experience. It'd be interesting to know whether there were some aspects that were less positive. So were there any bad bits, any learnings, and particularly with regard perhaps to the career transitions partnership?
Well, now I'm at this stage in my life, you realise that your family is the most important thing. I must admit there were times when I was just head down with work, working all the time. And, that can be a challenge for families, especially considering that they've, you've probably moved your family around with you into a place where they're not supported by their extended family. So, I think that's, part of service life that, people can be supported with. We can have welfare. We can have that sort of consideration. I'm wearing the SAFA tie at the moment. These are organisations that can help in that sort of situation. But I think our work ethic is so strong that should make us very, very appealing to other work that we do when we come out of the service. I also just want to underline as well how receptive we are to training. I think that's the key thing. So don't be fearful that on a CV that you're presented with from somebody who's been in the service, they haven't done exactly the thing that you're looking for, because trust me, they'll pick it up. I just imagine what do bomb disposal experts do when they leave the service? Because there probably isn't a job out there for them specifically, but the engineering that they've learned, the adaptive situations that they've learned, their commitment to hard work, all those things are in there, and you can train them up, and they can be very valuable members of your team. So, I had a fantastic career, working alongside some very dedicated people. So make sure you look after your family as well. I'll say that. But as far as work ethic goes, being receptive to training, you can't beat the forces.
No, thank you. That's very true. And as you say, especially at this time. We've had another question from the audience from Donna. She asks, the armed forces must fight in the digital age, yet struggles to retain digital skills. Should the narrative be more tech than tanks? Do you want to come in on that, Tom?
Gosh, well, that's. I don't feel qualified to write a defence review. It's an interesting question. I know it's been speculated about in the press that there is some thinking on this. It's very difficult to predict the future. And there are a lot of people, presumably at the Ministry of Defence and elsewhere, who are employed to try to look ahead at what the future threats are. And yes, it may be that fighting on the plains of northern Germany isn't the most pressing threat facing the UK at the moment, but but you never quite know where you're going to be in 10 or 15 years' time. So obviously there is, I think, a growing cyber threat, which is as well, potentially in terms of its sort of destructive nature, quite possibly as destructive as, say, a terrorist attack. In the UK, particularly, we've seen attempts to take out central government, or the NHS computer attack that we saw a little while ago. There are foreign actors out there, so I don't see. Obviously, I think sort of conventional warfare, I imagine, is going to be a thing, and it's not going to be something that's going to disappear, but or as a potential threat. But obviously what we do need to do, yes, absolutely, as Donna says, is upskill so that we've got the capability to meet these new challenges that we're facing, which is very difficult, because trying to meet those new challenges, and which are always sort of changing, sometimes they're very sophisticated, sometimes they're not. And that's going to be a real challenge for us in the future. And I think it's something we're going to have to add to our armoury, perhaps, rather than take bits out. It's something we're going to have an add-on as a bolt-on, so that we're on land, sea, air, and digital.
Yeah, I completely agree. Darren, any reflections from you on that, on the need for tech skills and the change in nature, perhaps, of the skills needed, or some of the skills needed?
Yeah, that's very true, and I agree with what Tom said there. We need to adapt, and I think we are adapting. I think the very senior staff in the military do understand that challenge that we face. Be under no illusion that we're always under threat. You may hear every now and again, a Russian aircraft comes into our airspace, or something's happening with the Russians. the Chinese, etc. But actually, it's constant. Those are just the ones you hear about every now and again. So, understanding intelligence, digital warfare, it's really, really important that we're upskilled for that. And it will reflect on the budget as well. What sort of budget do we have, and what will we spend it on? Are we going to buy tanks and ships, or are we actually going to invest in digital and intelligence, information gathering? I think that's really important. But I think the senior military staff do get that, and of course they're going to be lobbying us MPs and ministers to give them the budget accordingly.
I'm sure. Tom, we've had an interesting question. Inevitably, we tend to focus on the idea that you might start with a career in the armed forces and then move out and perhaps transition into the private sector. But we've had a question from Justin around whether it could also work the other way round, especially now the kind of skills need is changing and evolving. Could we see a more kind of integrated system, perhaps where some people start off in the private sector and join the armed forces at a later date or a later stage of their career? What do you think?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I'm guessing, there is a kind of there's a physical sort of test that has to be passed before when joining up. One of the reasons why I never did, because I would come nowhere near to passing it, and that's something that perhaps suits a younger person particularly. But if we give an example of some of the digital stuff that's going on, if these are skills that have been acquired in the private sector or in some other sort of non-military sector, maybe elsewhere in government, and they are transferable to a military role, then I can certainly see that the recruitment profile that the armed forces are running, should be expanded to take in that wider talent pool. Because I think at the end of the day, what we're looking at is, we're looking to recruit. Well, as the slogan goes, be the best, and you want to recruit the best. And if that's someone who's got some experience elsewhere, then that's all for the better. Which I think, for example, you look at, for example, security services recruitment. I think often recruits not only graduates, but those who have had careers in other fields who have gone in, and then they're having a career in security services as a second career. It may be that in a similar way, we want to look at the military as something that people go into, after doing something else.
Yes, yeah, I think so, and perhaps even look at some of the assessments that are being used. And do you need a fitness test for all jobs in the army, or perhaps not for some of them? We're getting lots of questions now, which is great. We've got about 10 minutes or so I'll try and run through as many as I can. We've had a question from Neil. He is asking whether the armed forces is prepared for a COVID-era world. How can the armed forces encourage recruitment for both regular and reservists in a post-COVID tech world? It's quite similar, I think, to some of the points you've made already, but is there anything you'd like to add to that, perhaps, Darren?
Well, yes. I mean, as we've said already, we've got those transferable skills in the military, just being able to adapt quickly to new scenarios and work with those, being receptive to training, as I think I mentioned before. And we haven't stopped even during COVID. Don't forget that the services had a lot to do. I'm in my constituency of Broxtowe, and in Broxtowe we have the 170 Engineering Support Regiment, and they have been involved in building Nightingale hospitals, for example, because they're all engineers. So we've been through it. We're people as well. We've got families. We're in the same environment everybody else is in, and we've got those military skills of adaptability and being able to be receptive to training and getting things done. So I think we're well placed to be the types of individuals that will do very well post-COVID.
I think if I could just come in, I think to some extent, we don't know what post-COVID looks like yet, and I think there's a lot of not just in this sector, but a lot of assumptions are being made in terms of like working from home, or what transport's going to be like, or the high street's going to be like post-COVID, and at the moment we're still in it, so we haven't quite got to the point yet, I think, where we can start to make that assessment. Completely agree with Darren. I think they're in a really good place if things do change, but we're not quite sure yet whether they are going to. I think there's a lot of speculation on this subject, but perhaps we just need to see where we are down the line in a few months' time, actually, to what extent society probably will change in some ways, but in some ways it's going to revert back to how we were pre-COVID. I'm not quite sure we've quite got to that stage yet, where we know what is and what isn't going to change.
Yes, I think that's completely true. I also think one of the many pluses of a career in the armed forces, and a huge plus at the moment, of course, is the job security you get from being in the armed forces, and I think that will be very much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds at this time. We've had one question, an important question from Kyle, who says that perhaps the problem isn't always about people leaving the army, but actually about how we retain people, how we persuade them to stay in the army for longer. And we do know that retention can be an issue. So I wonder whether, Darren, do you have any reflections and thoughts on that?
I think it's important to realise and reflect upon what happened to me, and that is, I started as an 18-year-old. I mentioned earlier, not knowing what I wanted to do. I wanted to get into a profession where they would train me, and they were smart, and they looked as though it was an organisation I wanted to be part of. By the time I left, I had 2 kids, a wife. I had a house that I owned, and so my situation had changed. So I think part of it, and they are already doing this, is adapting to that people change in life, and they've started to do that. What they've talked about, and I believe they are doing, is minimizing the movement of your family. So the person who's in the service will deploy and come back to the same place so that the family can take up roots in a particular area. And I think that's really useful for retention, because then they're having a family life. You're going back from your deployment to a happy family, and you're not just disrupting them every time. And I think they've understood that, and I think they are doing some work with that, and they've started to do it. Also, I'll make the point, it was touched on earlier, reserve services. There are politicians who are in the reserve forces as well. So it's changing a little bit. It might not be the type of job you just join when you're very young, and then you see it through to when you're still young, really, when you have to leave because, 55, you have to leave anyway, to a place where we're perhaps embracing, as Tom said, some of those skills that might be out in industry, in the wider country as a whole, that they can bring in and really utilise, even though these people are slightly older, and can work complementary to the other jobs that they're doing, like the reserve services, and some of the politicians that are doing that.
It's presumably also a sort of full offer. I guess. In terms of the motivation and what brings people into this, it's kind of vocational, in that it's an all-consuming job in many ways. But you've got to make sure that the full offer that you're getting, the general package that people are getting, is going to be continually attractive over a long period of time. Whether that's sort of CPD or career progression, and so forth. And I'm just going back to the sort of previous point we were making about recruiting later. I understand there's sort of sabbatical opportunities now in the armed forces, to go off into industry or something. And again, I think if that's part of the package that you're offering people, then that's perhaps going to retain people over a longer period of time than they would, previously have been inside the organisation. And that movement and change can kind of help perhaps hook, as Darren was explaining earlier, different roles he was doing, can provide that hook that keeps people interested for longer. So I think if that's a difficult one to get right, I imagine, but I think if you do, then you've got something that people want to commit to, not just for 10 years, but maybe 20 or 30.
Yes, absolutely. We are nearly out of time. We've got 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one last question, and I hope you will answer that. And then there is also a little bit of time for each of you to make any closing remarks that you still would like to mention. And the question really builds on the discussion we've just had around, I suppose, support for families and recognising that we've made a lot of progress, but perhaps there is more we can do. And the question is specifically around support for spouses and partners of people serving in the armed forces, and what more we should do to support spouses, and thinking perhaps about households where there are 2 people working. So that's the last question. So do you want to answer that? And then, as I said, make any other final closing remarks as well. Who wants to start?
Well, I think that's yeah, I'll start. So I think that's very, very important thing to really think about the families, and that's the way forward, really, because you come as a package, and you can get the best out of the serving people if you really think about their families. I did a role which was my favourite role in the Royal Air Force, which is actually why I wanted to become a politician in the end, because although I did all those roles as a logistics officer, I was community support officer at a major flying station where I was involved in the military covenant, making sure that service families weren't disadvantaged living in the civilian community, welfare, housing. And I found that I absolutely loved it. It was my favourite role. And that's why I came out of the military, did a couple of jobs which used my logistics and project management experience. But then I decided, actually, I've got a second chance at doing something that I thought was brilliant, working with people and helping people. And that's what got me, into politics. But I think it's really, really important, and they are already doing this with various organisations that exist, making sure that we think about the communities that are involved. So, when people finish work, they come outside the wire. They don't necessarily want to go back into the wire for a club or whatever it might be. So what about having the sorts of facilities that you would have in any town in the community? If you're next to a town, then how do we make sure that it's all integrated into that town? Minimum movement is a really good thing, so that the spouse can then look at, furthering their career or whatever they might want to do. Child minding and that sort of thing, thinking of all those sorts of things so that people can have a life. It is a way of life. It's not just a job. And let's really make it, so that we feel that's important to us. It's not just the mission, but it's also how we look after the families as well.
Absolutely. Tom?
Yeah, I think it is, you've got to look at it on a human level, haven't you? It's part of, if you want, and again, this goes back to the retention point, I guess. If you want to retain people for a long period of time, you can't treat them as employees or just stats on a piece of paper. You've got to think about the broader context in which they're operating, which is that people want to have families, they want to have relationships, they're going to have children, and if those sort of things are blocked off to them, then they're going to look for jobs where they can do that. So yeah, I think it's absolutely important if we can get spouses being included in posting, are included in this whole sort of process. Maybe even, is there an opportunity? Obviously, we've got now lots of working families where it's probably the norm now, where both husband and wife are working. If you've got the spouse of a serving personnel person, can they be sort of employed in some capacity if they're looking for a career in that field? And just keeping them in the loop and feel like they're part of the process, as opposed to some sort of extra, which I guess is what a lot of larger organisations are very used to doing. It's certainly something that the armed forces should be doing as well.
Absolutely, really important question, I think, to end on. Fascinating discussion. We're out of time, I'm afraid. So thank you so much, Darren and Tom, to both of you for joining the discussion. Thank you to Conservative Friends of the Armed Forces. I think we lost James somewhere along the line, and Richard unfortunately wasn't able to join in the end, but we've had a great discussion. So thank you to everybody, and thank you, of course, to the audience, and I hope you enjoyed it.